Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, a special series from the New Books Network. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karyne Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
Good morning. Welcome back to Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds. Our increasingly digital world is reshaping our brains and our lives. I'm Dr. Karyne Messina, a psychoanalyst and psychologist. I'm joined by Dr. Harry Gill, who is our wonderful co-host. And today we're going to be talking about something that's very important. It's really basic. It's our psyches specifically. So that's id, ego, and superego. And we'll be talking from a psychoanalytic and a neuroscience perspective. Today we'll focus on the ego, which is the organizing part of our psyches. So if you think of the id, the ego, and the superego, I more or less, and Dr. Gill, please add anything to this metaphor that I have, but I kind of think of it as a household. So maybe we have a mom or a dad who keeps things on schedule, keeps the household going, make sure that the meals are made on time, make sure that the kids do their homework, and everything just kind of moves along as one would hope. And then maybe a relative shows up who's kind of on the wild side, wants to do everything. This is the age, just wants to drink anytime, eat anytime, is not very neat and tidy. And so the whole house is in an uproar. And then maybe another parent comes in, or the other parent, maybe a grandparent comes in and says, no, we're going to shape up this show. We're going to clean up this act. And they might overdo it. And they may be quite finger pointing and punitive. That's the superego. So that needs to be kind of held in check too. So a lot is going on if you think about those three aspects of our psyche when it comes to our digital world. But Dr. Gill, would you like to add anything about that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting analogy. We never talked about it that way. I like it. I'm going to talk about id, ego, and superego from sort of neuroscience perspective because I think very interesting. Very early in my career, in the course of pursuing PhD in neuroscience, I ran into Alexander Luria. He's a Russian neuroscientist or neurologist that wrote a book, Functional Organization of the Brain, in the early 70s. And that's pretty remarkable that is still kind of how we think the brain is organized. We have more detail, that the basic bones are there. And how also it overlaps with Freud's ideas of id, ego, superego. Id being kind of the cauldron of our drives, the sexual and aggressive impulses in the traditional theory. So from brain perspective, this is something that we're born with. It's the temperament, it's the amount of neurotransmitters. Some people are by nature more intense, more aggressive, more sexual. There are some temperamental differences across cultures that are interesting to think about as well. I think we'll get more into it at some point in time in the future conversations. So kind of a basal ganglia, the part of the brain that we're born with and have X amount of serotonin and dopamine and all of those neurotransmitters that are flowing. Ego then being the part of the brain that interfaces with reality, the part of the brain that looks at the world and figures out what's what. And that part of the brain is mostly developed very early in the development. As we talked about the prefrontal cortex that studies the world around us and begins to know, okay, this is mom and this is dad, and when I need food, I'm going to cry and the food will arrive. And then finally, the superego that slowly develops, just as you said, the grandmother comes in and points the finger. It's the set of sort of social and moral norms and mores of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and it's highly culture-based, and it's a regulator for the interface between id that wants to be aggressive or be sexual, and ego in the middle, kind of between superego saying to the id, no, you can't really be sexual here, it's not appropriate, or aggression display at this point in time will lead you into trouble. And ego is kind of crushed between the two forces. Superego conceivably really sits somewhere in the prefrontal cortex, because prefrontal cortex is the only part of the brain that has the capacity to inhibit, to basically say no to an innate impulse. So there are neurons that say, no, you can't do something.
That's very illuminating. Now, going back to the ego, I guess I have metaphors on my mind today. I'm kind of thinking of the ego as a selfie. Now, the concept of a selfie is not what it used to be. It's not a snapshot. It's a performance. It's a curated presentation designed for likes and followers and validation. So that gets pretty complicated. Say, for example, when you're a teenager grappling with identity, Eric Erickson's identity versus role confusion. This idea of a selfie not just being a snapshot, that's pretty complicated. It becomes the focus of the lives of so many young people. I mean, I like selfies too, but I don't wrap myself around the axle if they don't turn out so well. So that's another way to think about the ego.
Absolutely. The concept of self. My mind goes in the direction, sort of one of the questions that I get asked by clients, what is the goal of therapy? And I said, one of the goals is to understand who you are, and the other is why you make decisions that you make. And all of that is really understanding ego, which is part of the ego psychology and the workings of ego. The notion of early development of identity. And I love Erickson's stages of development. The identity of confusion these days, where people don't know, kids don't know who they are, and they are over-sexualized very early. They begin to ask themselves, are they attracted to boys or girls at the precious age of 11 or 12 and sometimes 10? And conceptually, they don't even know what that means, but they're pressed into creating a sense of self, or ego in this sense, that is a presentation of self. And anxieties about how one is perceived really leads to mental health issues that lead to therapy.
Yeah.
So the treatment of ego and a sense of self oftentimes is the core of what you and I do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So, how do we begin to repair this in a way that makes sense to people who might be listening? Since the ego thrives on boundaries, this is where tech hygiene comes in. What can we do about it? This is not just a lifestyle hack, but as a practice of ego fortification. How can we work on this? Well, for one thing, I know you have lots of ideas about this. We can establish a no phone zone. We could have offline mornings, or maybe even a weekly digital Sabbath. Now that sounds like, oh, yeah, I could never do that, but you'd be amazed at what you can do if you start out. You don't have to start out with a week, but a couple of hours a day would be very advantageous. This can help us reclaim our psychic space and rebuild these internal boundaries that are so very important. So we're not just swept away by somebody else's idea of what we should be doing.
I absolutely agree. And personally, I do have Sabbaths, if you will. Saturday and Sunday tend to be very, very tech free from communication. other than texting friends if I have to, or receiving a phone call. But even within that, there are blackout periods. But I think one of the trends, and this is where COVID really disrupted the formation of ego. I see a lot of children that are pre, during, and post COVID, and something that algorithms created are, we talked about them, echo chambers of people with similar ego structures, or comfort creating ego structures, meaning this is the way I am, and this is the way Polly across the moon is, and this is the way Jimmy in San Francisco is. So it could attract people that are sort of similar and create comfortable echo chamber, which creates rigidity in the sense of self, because we're not encountering people that are our neighbors whose brains may be very, very different. Ego is, if we go back to the definition of our brain gaining a sense of reality, it is mutual consensus of the variety of brains of what the reality is. It created interesting fragmentation in the political structure, interesting bifurcation in the communities across the globe. All the countries are now 50-50. There's this tribe and then there's that tribe, and they totally disagree and don't see the same way, which is in many ways, I applauded the president, CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, that was one of the first very rigid presidents of businesses asking people to come back to work. Now, if he did it from the perspective of productivity, I looked at it from the perspective of a brain scientist, the necessity of actual engagement of disparate views on the world promotes a sense of self in a creative way versus a rigid, bound in several mirrors kind of way, which just reinforces the vulnerabilities. And ability to grow is always promoted through communication. But a real communication with people you don't necessarily know that well.
Continuing along those lines, and specifically towards what we can do about it, it's not fancy. It's nothing Herculean, or but it could feel like it. But I often think about narrative restoration. What can we do that's a simple thing? Well, you can talk in therapy if you happen to be in therapy, or you can journal. You can engage, and I know you talk about this a lot, in analog creativity. You talked to her, Gill, about analog clocks, that everything doesn't need to be digital. We don't need our Apple Watches and our phones and everything else. Say, for example, to wake us up in the morning. As you say, and I'd like you to say it again in a minute, you have a great rendition of digital clocks that I really like. But anyway, these things provide the scaffolding for our egos, our inner worlds, and we don't want our inner world to be dominated by algorithms and for validation. That certainly isn't optimal.
You're really stimulating me to think about the topic that is really crucial in the development of any human being, which is the topic of resilience. Ego strength is the capacity to tolerate frustration. And one of the things that I particularly object to in digitalization of creativity, it is easy. It is very, very easy to pick up an Apple Pen and draw a picture on an iPad, because iPad did 80% of the work. And that creates an experience of reality in which the brain of the user feels, oh, painting is easy. Well, painting isn't easy. It's actually difficult. Or creating music. One of the things that forever I like to do with my kids is to have them learn an instrument. Not because I want them to be a great pianist or to be a great violinist or guitar player. Don't care. But it's an experience of challenge. A challenge of something that is not easy, that requires commitment, energy, devotion, and then the sense of joy in being able to do something. To give an example of a very young client who's 12 to 13, he discovered has autism spectrum, a delightful young man, and he discovered that he's really good at crocheting, of all things. And this is a boy. And he loves his crocheting, and he's actually really quite good at it. So he's opening a store online. I won't mention where. And yeah, this is a young man that has discovered something that gives him meaning in the world in which some of his challenges have created real biological challenges of interacting with other people, including his parents. The joy of generativity, to use Erickson's term, is so fundamental to the human being. And it's not reactivity, meaning reacting to the stimulus on the screen. It is actually creating something, hence the analog. You, if I may disclose, like you used to do glass blowing, and you created amazing, beautiful sculptures that are evocative. I own 2 of them, and it's something that is there. It's permanent. It's connection. It is real. My ego can interact with it. It has memories associated with it. It is non-perishable. And it's interesting to think of the new generation rediscovering vinyl records. I'm an avid collector, and again, I think it is because the generation has discovered that convenience is not adequate replacement for connection, for relationship, even relationship with the medium, relationship with a book, relationship with a record, that you have memories associated when you bought it, how you bought it, maybe the first listening experience, versus you pushed a button on Spotify, you heard something and you moved on. So building blocks of ego are beginning to be torn apart by the screens. And again, they're necessary. We all use them. But as you said, the mental hygiene around our experience of life in the real world versus experience of life in the digital world should be separate, and we should be aware of the boundaries. And I'm thinking, do you want to comment on your most recent writing about AI and the relationships and the romance in the digital world, the AI relationships? I don't know, that's also part of that ego interaction where people totally lose sense of who they are and who they're in love with.
Yeah. Well, that one we could spend a week on for sure. If we might perhaps wrap this segment up, I would like to say, and please follow it with your final thoughts. I think that if you get lost in thinking about what is it that I can do to stop my addiction to this digital world that I'm in, think about connecting with other people, real human beings, and that should help you get back on course again, as well as the other things that we talked about.
Very practical advice, which some of my patients find very useful. If you are single and you feel lonely and it's hard to connect with people, if you work, not from home, but from your workplace, after you work, don't go home directly. Go somewhere until 8 p.m. where there are other people. Restaurant, bar, library, chair in the park, doesn't matter. Don't go home and turn on TV or look at your phone.
Very good advice. Okay, well, we'll see you next time for part 2. Thank you very much.